Hello there. What a good day. So the starting point for this discussion was that over the last few years, it feels like we've all been on a bit of a journey at both ends of the production chain. So we've had changes in the way that sports are mixed. We've had changes to the formats they're mixed in, the way they're delivered. And we've also had changes in viewers' expectations with, and Alex touched on it earlier with the Sky Glass, that consumers are more savvy and they expect things in a different way. So in this last session, we've got this fabulous panel of people who have all been instrumental in developing some of these new ways of working. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is we're going to ask what's changed over the last few years in terms of how they work, and more importantly, where they think it's going to go in the next few years. So we've got Emma Penny, who's sound manager at Discovery Sports, and Mark Ledwidge, who's the sound team leader at Sky Sports, and we've got Louise Willcox, who is sound designer at DRW Associates. So a good place to start, and it feels a bit like cloud's been casting a shadow over all of us all afternoon. And we've already had a session, but hopefully, I think you'll be able to bring something different to it, something new to it. So can I start with you, Emma?
Of course, yeah.
So what are the challenges and benefits for audio in the cloud, and how do you see them being overcome or advancing production in the future from an operating point of view?
Sure. I think very similarly to how sort of Pete and Harry said, the cloud, it depends on the application that you want to use it for. And it's been great for transport and also as a DR scenario as well. And I think we still come across the same challenges in the cloud that we find with other transport infrastructures. We still have to deal with latency. And something else I've really found with I work with a production and a cloud format is having to explain to them that it's not magic. Like there's still the same things to consider as you would have in a gallery, And I think people forget that sometimes.
Yeah. Mark, any thoughts?
I think working in a remote or a cloud way has made just such a difference. Looking at Sky, 4 years ago we had one remote gallery and we were just sort of playing with it almost, it seemed, and now we've got 6 remote galleries. It means our staffing has had to increase, which is a surprise, because we need more people to do it. Training has been much easier because we don't have to send people hundreds of miles or wherever it is to the location to do it. Yeah. They can be in the gallery. We can do offline training. So I think cost has been a huge thing for us. In our department has increased. Our travel costs have gone down, and our skill levels have raised over the last few years.
Yeah. But what about the practicality of it? There was an article with Larissa Gaunier from Grass Valley on Sports Video Group a few months back, and she was talking about audio cloud production and how it's more about controlling timing issues. Louise, we were talking earlier a little bit about that. And audio's always been about, latency and synchronization. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think obviously cloud gives you incredible flexibility. It gives you the ability to allow the audience to select sources if they wish themselves. They can stream, they can pick out specific audio. But we as operators end up wrestling to get it all into sync to transmission, wrestling to get the feeds between contributors, be they commentators or directors to cameramen and so forth, such that that latency that we're having to compensate for doesn't affect how they work with each other. And that, for me, is the biggest hurdle. As an operator, I probably am the least infrastructure-savvy person I feel in the room, but I am a good sound mixer. And I would worry about, I can manage latency to transmission, but then it's a whole other mindset to sort out the latency and when you need latency and when you don't need latency in all your background feeds.
See, everybody's nodding.
Yeah, latency to me is the big thing, which if you're savvy about dealing with it, I feel you've got a job for life these days until you technical guys out there fix it. Now, I've got to.
I was just going to say on that point. yeah, the cloud, I mean, certainly at Sky, the cloud did make sports like the netball, as Harry mentioned, like really accessible, which was great. It allowed us to, I think it was the first time ever that every netball match has ever been broadcast, and we did most of that through YouTube. It wasn't taking up a PCR in the facilities at Sky. It was amazing. But yeah, I mean, it's not always necessarily a fully integrated solution yet, just because of the fact that you do have those like things like comms. I think has been a real sticking point for a lot of people working in the cloud, and sort of the constant thought about the journey from cloud to ground and what you need to bring back into your main building is always still something to consider.
Yeah, I think sync as well is a big issue, like was sort of mentioned, but nothing's in sync these days, and it seems that way, you know. Well, the amount of times the director says, "Is this interview in sync? Is that in sync?" And you're looking at a completely different monitor feed than they are. They're on a multi-viewer. It's all
Your monitor's latent.
yeah. It's vision problems that's give us
The audio compensate for, yeah.
That's often the case, isn't it?
Always.
Yeah, yeah. So, so we're at the right. So let's say we're at the beginning of this cloud journey. Let's call it a journey. But in terms of remote production, that's something else that you've all had to deal with massively over, since COVID. We were doing a little bit before, weren't we? But COVID made it established. It's almost boring now to say, it's an established way of working now. But from an output and a comms point of view, how have you had to adapt to having to mix the audio from a completely different location? And what technology make that process easier for you? Emma, is that something you
Yeah, I mean, in terms of technology, something that I've definitely found help, sort of having things like either the CalRack RP1 or the Larvo Power Core, sort of real-time solutions where you can see how your counterpart at the other end is working on solving an issue at the same time as you are. And also I think sort of the division of labour was when I first came to Sky and we were doing Formula One remote, sort of the division of labour where all of a sudden you almost had sort of 2 sound guarantees, whereas previously you'd only had 1. Sort of having to make the decisions like, are you going to solve that problem? Am I going to solve that problem? Sort of the clear communication between people there. And it also became obvious like how much you needed people working on the ground who already knew the productions, because it's so hard to communicate sometimes. If you're in a remote location, like over a sort of shashi radio and someone's in a concrete tunnel, so how you need something rigged. Yeah, we suddenly realised we were very reliant on people who knew the jobs very well already.
Yeah, and being in the truck and being able to turn around to talk to your guarantee is fantastic. And if you're, hundreds, whatever, miles away, and you key them on talkback, no response, they're out fixing something, but you've no idea. Or there's a problem with the some of the microphones and stuff. And I know most of the crew that have been there up and down the country. But the more remote I do, the less I'll get to know the new people who come on. And then I'll just be talking to a voice, asking somebody I've never met to do something that I want them to do. You don't have those relationships in the same way that you would being in person.
Does that introduce more opportunities for people to get it? We've talked before a lot about people getting into the industry and having entry points. Does that introduce more opportunities for people to, if you need somebody who's at the venue, sorting stuff out, sorting out the infrastructure? Does that have an effect on that?
So how do you sort of bring new people into the industry, or?
Just more opportunities, more entry points to the opportunities.
I think, I guess it's a mixture, right? So, I mean, if you're used to mixing, if you're a sound supervisor used to mixing on site, so you're used to and sort of coming remote and having to deal with that change in workflow is always going to be sort of a learning curve, then equally maybe it is a good time to bring people in who didn't work in that way before. I mean, I guess there's always going to be, it will always be difficult having people who've then perhaps never even been to site, sort of mixing large sports that have never even been to the venue and seen it in real life. I suppose there's going to be positives and negatives to that.
I was going to say, I think that if we carry on down this mode, particularly for sport, which does lend itself, it's so formulaic, it lends itself to remote production, we may have to look at our training models. So your OB provider who's providing the mics and infrastructure at the far end may have to say, right, we're going to have to train our staff in a different way. And that will mean that you at the receiving end will hopefully have some confidence that the people at the other end will understand. At the moment, as you can see from the amount of grey hair in my head, I am part of the ageing population of sound people. And I was hoping to be training some replacements for me by now. And I think in the mode that I was trained in. It's about 25 years ago since somebody received the training that I got. And it would be really lovely. You only need a boot camp of about 7 weeks and you can get somebody putting microphones around a pitch with some level of understanding. We have monetised training a little bit in the universities and what have you. You don't need to spend 3 years learning how to do sound. You need to learn the basics, then get out there and be taught how to do it. And we can actually do that quite quickly. We just need some investment in that. And with remote production, I think that's probably more important.
There's a difference in there between remote production and distributed production. And just to touch on that in terms of how you think that might develop and if there's any aspects that that needs to be considered. Harry touched on it earlier when he was talking about using a sort of a graphical user interface to control. How do you think that? I mean, it's also a thing now. It's not what we do every day. But how do you think that might develop, Mark?
Well, I think Harry's a good example because Harry and myself, we're at the other end of the spectrum now. So he's the new boy coming in. He understands the software. He understands the cloud because he did at university. He comes in with that, and I'm now, unfortunately, one of the older people who understand the old-fashioned way of mixing. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to come in with a passion for sound to be working in sound. You could come in as a tech person who understands the tech, who's interested in sound. So it's maybe a different way. So that maybe goes back to your new opportunities. It's maybe that's where that would come in.
So we've been talking about remote working. We've been talking about distributed production and cloud rather. So all that's enabled by having more access to data as well, and data's. We've got access to faster data, and a shift to IP infrastructure has helped all that as well. Has having access to those transfer links had influenced the range of sports that you've been able to cover? Yeah. And how will it affect the quality of your output mix in the future for these sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changes the game hugely. I mean, going back to the netball again as an example, when I was at Sky, I mean, so many of those venues, it's a university gym. You've got no connectivity there, and there wasn't the budget to get a satellite, say, so using things like Live View and Mobile Viewpoint on either dirty internet or sometimes just cellular was an excellent option. I mean, it's not necessarily always the most stable option, but it is an option to get audio and video back. And we're looking at something very similar at Discovery at the moment for the Ocean Race, which we're doing in January. We're bringing things back on SRT streams, compressed video, and also cellular and internet-based protocols again. I mean, data you mentioned in particular. I mean, that gives you the most options, I suppose, in that you've always got access to it, but it's still just as unstable if you haven't got the signal there. I mean, same for 4G, same for 5G.
And a lot of the we've started doing the WSL last season, Women's Soccer League. A lot of the grounds aren't the grounds that the men will play at. So I think Arsenal do, but then they've got another ground they sometimes play at without any internet. So on the games where they play at the ground with the big pipe data, we can do a full incoming audios of everything we want. Other ones we're embedded cameras, so it's a much reduced audio spec. Whether people at home notice that, I don't know, but it makes life, much more difficult until...
I think people at home don't notice it, though, right? I mean,
I guess.
Whatever transport we're using in the background, they should be looking at the same product at the end, you would have thought.
Yeah, as long as the cameras look good, they don't care.
Oh, he's...
I'm bitter.
I feel your pain.
Yeah, so it affects, I mean, depending on what your backhaul is and what access you've got to, it will affect how you plan and set up, what your mix is going to consist of and how many feeds you can take in and how many, what your output's going to be. So I don't understand much about 5G. I know it's a thing, but so I mean, but it's already been talked about, isn't it? As like an audio transport for a bunch of stuff like getting signals back from stage boxes, for example. I mean, you said earlier, Emma, that it's still just data. I mean, do you think that what do you think the effect of 5G will have on audio? And how do you feel about it?
I'm just thinking, okay, how latent will it be? That's what I'm thinking.
Well-
I'm the end user. Okay, how fast is it going to get to me?
Well, I mean, like 5G is meant to be higher density and lower latency, but at the end of the day, I mean, like my phone is 5G enabled, and I still can't listen to Spotify going through a tunnel. You know, it's the same as I can't on 4G. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll open opportunities for sort of lower latency processing and potentially like higher density streams, but it still comes with the same issues of stability that it had before.
Yeah, yeah. So all these things are connected, really, aren't they? You've got data which enables remote working. You've got maybe potentially faster data, which makes working in the cloud seem a little bit less risky. For example, you talked about new opportunities for people, earlier. What's the effect of all this on how networks are set up? Because you talked about training, and it would be on the job, and you would pick up a little bit, every time. Is it completely different? Is it completely different now, or will it be in the future?
Well, not talking about networks per se, but once again talking about individuals and the profession. I have a sneaking suspicion that you might end up with a different breed of, if you like, sound designer going out and doing the sound design at venues.
Maybe not going out.
Maybe not. No, I'm talking about a little bit like a unit manager does at the moment for an outside broadcast. I mean, I don't know if many of you look at planning sheets on outside broadcast, but the audio section of it is quite minimal. And some sound supervisors quite like it like that because it leaves the mystery in their hands and, makes them indispensable. But we're going to come to the point where even people like me retire. And I think a new role might be for a sound designer to go out on location, build the sound design, plan it, and offer it to the crew who are going to actually be on site and to you guys who are going to be remote or cloud mixing it. And they will define it. It will obviously refine, but if you're not going to be there, but you want somebody informed to actually do the design before, so you're not presented with some horrible fait accompli, is my personal feeling.
No, you definitely want a sound person there, not a tech manager.
Yeah.
Or a tech manager who was a sound engineer.
Yeah, if you've got somebody who's got the relevant qualifications, that's fine.
The final question I was going to ask was about, not the final one. I've just done what you did earlier, Heather. Not the final question. But there's been a lot of talk about next generation audio stuff this afternoon, all the loads of really groovy, immersive work that's been done. And Ben was talking about, using personalization using MPEG-H, which is, I mean, when we've been talking about these things for ages, it feels like ages. What are your thoughts on how next generation audio concepts will progress, and what are the most, in your opinion, what are the most exciting aspects of that?
I think personalisation will be a big one potentially. I mean, like take a thing like football. If you could put yourself in either the home crowd or the away crowd, I'm sure that'd be something that users would be really into, or ride on alongside a particular F1 car, for example.
Potentially, yes. I mean, I think 20 years ago, Sky tried, what was it called, Fan Zone, and you would have home and away commentary. You press the red button and did that. And it started off and people loved it for 10 minutes, and then they turned it off and went back to football. But that was a very long time ago, and people have very much changed the way they watch or listen to television. I think personalisation could be very good. My daughter's partner is hard of hearing and finds it extremely difficult to watch football, or most sports actually, because they can't hear the commentary. So if you can turn up the commentary or turn down the effects or whatever you want to do, or bring the commentary to a different speaker or whatever, that for them would be a huge step. But I guess the average viewer might play around, mess it up, and then just sit back and put it back to zero. I don't know.
Save the delivery if you're selling multiple languages as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not more about improving it, improving the audio. It's about giving people options and choices. Yeah.
I'm not a Luddite. I like development, but I do you don't want to give, it's not that I don't want to give people, I want to give people choice, but they're like with the 5.14, you're giving people that immersive experience, but there are some people who don't know what to do with it. You don't want to muddy the information carrier. If you can then give people who feel it has been muddied for them the option to zoom in on the information carrier, the commentary, or, you know, stand-up positions and what have you, that I think is a positive. But for those who've got the big system at home, like my son has got a massive screen, he's got the 5.1, he'll be going immersive soon. You know, for him it'll be a fantastic experience and he'll relish it, you know.
Okay. So my last question is probably the most important one. And it's to sum up. And so I'll ask each of you in turn. What is going to be the most disruptive technology for sports broadcasting? And it says here, one-line answer, but don't limit it to one line because that's ridiculous.
I don't know. The most disruptive tech, I would say the production of the most disruptive tech. For me, yeah, I'm going to pass on that.
I mean, arguably you don't want tech to be too disruptive, but it's, I mean, I think that data transport will be, I think we'll see a lot of changes in that in the next year, and it'll become a real tool for a lot of productions. But I think also, I mean, we've talked a lot today in the cloud and with IP infrastructures about sort of interoperability and the idea of control, having a center of control for lots of different bits of kit working like on different standards. So I think that's something that we'll have to see some progression in as well in the next year.
I'm trying to think disruptive. I was fantasising about places like Manchester United and what have you having their own built-in microphone array and forgetting the sound assistants altogether, you know, because it would be the cheaper thing to do.
You need someone to adjust the mic, so.
Exactly. So it might be that if somebody does go down that route, the fact that there isn't anybody there to sort the microphones will be disruptive. But yeah, no, it'll be something that's got massive latency that will disrupt me. As you can tell, I'm just focused on latency.
You're very focused on latency.
Oh, so much. I spend my life sorting out latency.
Has anybody got anything else they want to add? Or?
I was just going to ask you technical developers out there. The nirvana for me would be, whether I'm a commentator, whether I'm a microphone on a football pitch, whether I'm a talkback feed, I would like there to be a digital tag on the thing, time of day, time code maybe, saying, I started at this moment in time, and when it arrives at whatever desk, you hit the button and say, right, sync up, please, and then we can decide. I can fade you up and you'll all be in sync. Absolutely in sync. You know.
That's cheating.
Well, it's only sprocket holes, electric sprocket holes, please, for every sound source, and then we can decide we want it delayed or we don't.
Can we talk that?
And that would require it across vision and sound. It's not just sound. It's got to be. There's the goalpost. Please stick to it. Yeah. Right. Naive, I know. Sorry.
All the microphones are IP, and that's all.
There we go.
Have GPS receivers in them. Then if it's a smart mic, it can do that. It can say where it is, but it also can get a timing signal from the GPS.
But will it be in sync with the picture? It's also, I want the picture to be in sync with the microphone, in sync with the talkback.
If the microphone knows where it is in time, then it can be the adjustment can be automated.
I spend my life looking at IP-delivered pictures, you see, where they've got timing going around, and still when you fade them up, they're parts of milliseconds out of sync.
Yeah.
You can't crossfade between audio sources carried on the pictures.
Well, while we're talking, I wanted to just ask, particularly Mark, but also you guys, Louise and Emma, does the sort of transition to the production hub model, does this sort of enable diversity? I feel like in our industry, we really have a diversity and inclusiveness problem. A lot of old white guys in this room like me. And Listen Sky has done a lot to try to address that, but we still feel like we have a ways to go. Does this sort of moving into a production hub environment instead of being in the truck?
Well, by dint of you being in a production hub where you have more staff and where now society is more diverse and the people operating, employing your staff, feel not only an obligation from a, well, not an obligation, but feel that they should reflect society. Yes, clearly it would, I think, affect your diversity figures. Where you've got the
You've got to
majority...
get the the diverse people in the first place, to be in that hub, to be able to come in and do it, I think, and that's something, like you say, that Sky are trying to look
Yes.
at. I think with opportunities, I look back and try and, I think these figures are right, but before we went to remotes, we had 8 supervisors who would drive up and down the M6 and do all our football and rugby and stuff like that. And now, at the last count, we have 19 people who can do remote football back at Osterley. So that's more than doubled. And that's coming from people who have wanted a trail, who maybe been free, or they've done the comms, and they sit there and go, oh, what are you doing there? Can I have a look and have a play and do that? And so there's much more opportunity for people to get in and do that. Whether they're diverse or not, I think that's at the employment stage. You know, I mean, we had, well, Emma's left us, shame. But you know, we had a couple of years ago, a year ago or so, we advertised, we had 62 applicants and we had 1 woman. And so I think a lot of that is from where do we advertise? Is it because women feel that it's not a job for them, or what? I don't know. I mean, that's really not a discussion I can put my finger on, but.
I mean, I don't know, Emma, if you've ever done this, but I've been dragged into schools. Well, not dragged, I've walked into schools and gladly said, you do realise if you do a job like mine, you'll earn a hell of a lot more money than if you go being an admin assistant somewhere. I know that's a classic stereotype, but I think we need to start way back in education as well. And as employers go out and say, here you go, these are the jobs that are available to you. Come on, boys, girls, black, white, brown, let's get stuck in. Yeah?
Yeah, I've got a few points on this, actually. I think that, I mean, we've talked a lot today about sort of people's job roles changing. I think there should be a real emphasis on companies to understand how the roles have changed, and then maybe look at the way we, like, changing the way we advertise, the way we write job descriptions, because we're not necessarily looking for someone to come in who has a degree in acoustics now. It's not relevant. So I think there needs to be an understanding throughout management and middle management as to what kind of people you're looking to get into a company and what the basic skills are that you need. And I think, I mean, from speaking as a woman working in the industry and how you get women working in roles to make a more diverse workforce, I mean, like, on the most basic level, I mean, women aren't often encouraged into STEM, like science, tech, engineering, mathematics degrees. And then on top of that, obviously, if there isn't very much representation of women in the industry, then they are less likely to think it's a job for them. But I also think, even not just for women, for anyone, I mean, seeing jobs advertised, particularly with sort of job title engineer in them, when actually a lot of what we do is soft engineering, I'd argue, rather than hard engineering. I think there's a lot of change you can make to job descriptions there that will open up roles to people that perhaps wouldn't have looked at it before.
Yeah, well, because graphics or editing is sort of perceived as being creative. And audio still has this stigma of engineering that implies hard engineering when it really isn't hard engineering. And that may be part of the problem.
I like the term sound designer now. I think we should use that more. Because when I started out as sound supervisor, sound engineer, sound operator, and you go into school and you say, well, what does that mean? You know, but a sound designer gives it a creative bent, which I think is good.
Yeah, agreed. Does anybody else have any questions for the panel? Yes.
Do you guys feel that IP microphones is relevant for your workflow? And if so, what kind of feature sets that you guys would like to see? I'll give you an example. I didn't have time to discuss the working schedule. We are working on a project that we have an IP mic, and it has features such as NFC card reader, so you can use a form and load like a section of missing desk for DSP, you know, user profile per se, or you can have a gyroscope, you know, GPS, so you know where the microphone is. Plus, you know, if somebody wants to lock the position, somebody knock the microphone, you know, or a microphone to indicate the direction where the microphone is pointing at, for instance. So, is any of these relevant for I mean, not only for remote production, but for small productions where you have limited amount of people, that you can, all this information is live, you can see in real time what's going on. Is that will be relevant?
What cabling do they need, IP microphones?
Well, it will be like a pipe.
Yeah,
You know, it's not
the PoE, so yeah.
it'll be, you know, something that will be easy to integrate in the existing infrastructure.
I can definitely imagine like the GPS function in particular being useful on something like motorsport, where you can actually locate exactly where your microphones are. And if you are hearing an issue with one, it might make it faster to locate where it is and get it replaced. Definitely.
Anything else from anyone? No. Good. Thank you very much. I think we're done.